Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility on this Tuesday. It is Cinco de Mayo. It is May 5th, 2015, and we welcome you to today's program. I'm sure that those of you who are listening live now recognize, since we just began, that this is a Tuesday, and we do begin 1/2 hour later on our Tuesday programs than we do on Monday and Wednesday. So I welcome you to the program. I invite you to take advantage of, avail yourself of the phone number we have, and give other listeners an opportunity to hear your thoughts and your ideas on some of the issues we've been dealing with. We spent pretty much the full program yesterday on the issue of work, jobs, and I want to kind of revisit some of that for a while today anyway. But if you were able to join us yesterday, and if you have thoughts or ideas or reactions or questions or considerations or whatever, then I invite you to take the opportunity to give us a call on our reserved phone line, and we'd love to get you on the air and share your thinking with some of the other folks that are tuned in to the Virtual Center. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to email me directly and share your thoughts that way, I would love to hear from you. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. WAObrien, OBRIEN 906. That's all one word, no punctuation, at gmail.com. I mentioned, obviously, in giving the email, fortunate this morning to, I feel a little bit bad about this, to be very honest with you, because it looks like I got an email this morning from Harry in Baltimore, and of course you know that Harry joined us last week for two of our programs, last Tuesday and Wednesday both. We were focusing then on the situation in Baltimore, and of course Harry lives in Baltimore, so we were doing that. But in the course of our discussion and an exchange of emails that he and I have had since then, Harry has mentioned in passing a number of things about his own background, and one of the things that impressed me in our conversations last week was his familiarity with a sociologist named Richard Sennett, Sennett. And I didn't quite know exactly what the contact was, but Harry has told me in the email that he sent me this morning that he was enrolled in a class, and a sociology class, and Richard Sennett was a guest lecturer, and he really impressed Harry quite a bit. And as a result, Harry, and this was several years ago, but Harry has read, I believe he said 3 of his books. So anyway, this morning I woke up and I got this email from Harry, and a little bit was very pleasant, very personal. And he said, I've sent you an attachment of some of the relevant paragraphs from Richard Sennett's stuff. Well, I looked at the attachment. It's 35 pages long. What Harry has done is go through the book and pull out for me relevant paragraphs in 3 of his books, I believe. I haven't gotten all the way through the attachment yet. I got it this morning, so I only had about an hour or so to look at what he had said. But the first book, which is about 16 pages of material, is on the 1972 book that Richard Sennett wrote, entitled The Hidden Injuries of Class. And Harry said that his later books in some areas, in places in his later books where he touches on some of the same issues, he has refined some of the ways that he deals with these issues. But as Harry said, the real essence of what Richard Sennett is about is in this Hidden Injuries of Class book. And so the relevant paragraphs that he sent me this morning, I looked at a number of them. I jotted down a few notes. I was going to do something a little bit more in-depth with it because there were certain paragraphs that jumped right out at me. But to be honest with you, it was so late in the game before we went on the air today that I thought I would postpone, but I'm postponed for another day. I've started to look at the second book that he deals with, which is issues related to the new capitalism. This is a book that Sennett wrote in 2006, and I want to spend some serious time looking at that one. So my guess is that I will be back with you, and we will be joined, in spirit at least, by Richard Sennett, and hopefully we'll be joined in real time by Harry in Baltimore, hopefully. But I'd like to deal with a little bit of what he dealt with today because it touches directly on some of the material that we were talking about yesterday. And as I said at the very beginning, I'm a little bit embarrassed because Harry mentioned the fact that it was like 3 a.m. this morning when he sent that email. And so basically the thought that he was sitting there while I was in La La Land, as most of us were at 3 in the morning, and he was sending me an email. I felt a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit guilty about that, but I want to assure him that I will do due diligence in pouring through some of this material because through Harry, and I've got to say this very directly, I was almost totally unfamiliar with Richard Sennett until Harry raised the name, and I've done a little bit of work on my own on the internet. I've looked him up. I've looked at some of the reviews on a few of his books, and then I got this absolutely juicy 35-page attachment from Harry this morning. So I'm beginning to appreciate Richard Sennett, and I have Harry to thank for that. So with that, I do want to touch on a few of the things we talked about yesterday because there's no way one program or one visit is going to exhaust the issue of jobs and the concept of work and all that's associated with it. It seems to me, if you think back to yesterday, and I'm not going to review the whole 2 hours from yesterday, but as I think back on it, it seems to me that the keys that we spent our time with was on the one hand the issue of a career. The issue of careers, more specifically, the issue of jobs. And what I was hoping to do was create a little bit of a distinction by focusing a little bit of attention on the similarities and differences between those two words. What goes through our mind when we think of the term jobs or a job, as opposed to what goes through our mind when we talk about career. I think the third issue that became extremely relevant in yesterday's program was the question of dignity, the issue of human dignity, and the extent to which dignity is or should be a key ingredient of every job. I mentioned our friend Wayne yesterday, and I kind of paraphrased one of Wayne's mantras, and many of you know who are familiar with Wayne and who tune in regularly on the Head On Radio Network. You know that Wayne is very, very heavily involved in the issues related to labor, to work. And I've heard Wayne more than once lay into this issue of human dignity and its association, or its presumed association with work. And Wayne's position is, and and I hope that I don't misspeak, because I think he's convinced me. I think I agreed with him anyway, but the way he puts it, and he says, basically anybody who works, anybody who is willing to work, to put in an honest day's work, irrespective of whatever that job happens to be, whatever that work happens to be, is due, because they live in the society, has a right to certain things. And among those things is a living wage, a roof over their heads, education for their children, health care, and dignity when they retire. Dignity that stems directly from appreciation for the work that they did, whatever that work happened to be. Because the thinking is that everybody's job in one way or another contributes to the well-being of the community at large. That's Wayne's position. I've heard him make that statement or make those connections more than a couple of times. And he's convinced me that the way that rolls off his tongue, so to speak, it suggests to me that it's coming directly from way down deep, where Wayne really lives. And he's convinced me, and I am in agreement with that particular perspective. And that's what we were talking about yesterday, is the whole issue of respect, dignity. And the extent to which we tend to assume that it comes with a career, but we tend to assume just the opposite when we're talking about a job. And increasingly, what we've allowed to happen, I believe, is that we have allowed our jobs to be defined principally by the amount of money that an employer is willing to pay to get that job done. In a sense, then, what we have done naturally, because this is really one of the natural inclinations, or the natural happenings, if you will, that go hand in hand with the issues of quantification, assigning numbers to particular issues and to particular values. Because when you assign numbers, by definition, you automatically relate one number to the other. When you have a situation which can be quantified, an outcome, an objective, or a result that can be quantified, in other words, something that a number can be assigned to, then by definition you are creating the opportunity to rank those particular issues. In the case of jobs, there's a natural inclination to attach the importance of the job to the amount of money that an employer is willing to pay in order to get that job done. And so the logical assumption is the more the job pays, the more important it is. And as we have seen some of the best paying manufacturing jobs in the country leave over the last 35 or 40 years, to be replaced by, in many cases, service sector jobs that don't pay nearly as much. Many of them don't carry benefits, because all of these things tend to be driven by the bottom line. Then, in a sense, what we have done is we have allowed the respect and the dignity that used to be, and traditionally has been, and perhaps ought to be, associated with work, to disappear. We have allowed the number itself to define the quality of the job. And as a result, the only thing that seems to matter to anybody is how much does it pay. And the assumption is if it pays a lot, then that's probably because it's considered to be important. If it doesn't pay much, then the conclusion naturally tends to be, well, it can't be that valuable a job. It can't make that particular job, can't be that important in terms of its overall contribution to the well-being of the community at large. When you say it that way, when I hear myself say that, it becomes clear to me how erroneous, how mistaken that particular point of view is. But the fact of the matter is we do it, and we rarely question it. I think that one of the first things we need to do if we're going to turn this around as a society is to begin to think through exactly what we're doing and what we mean. As I mentioned, the reason we start a half hour late on Tuesdays is because I go to a noon Rotary meeting here in southern West Virginia on Tuesday. And our program today was our just recently elected new Republican congressman from the 3rd District here in southern West Virginia, Evan Jenkins. And he delivered the program today. And he was talking about what's going on in Congress and some of the interesting people he's met since he's been there and all of that. And toward the end of his presentation, he began to hit the real issue, jobs. And he basically said, I mean, just, it was almost, I couldn't believe it. It was so perfect given what we did here at the Virtual Center yesterday. And Congressman Jenkins made the point and said, of course, a lot of these problems, the drug problem and the crime problem and all of these other things that he touched upon, a lot of these problems would disappear if we could lay our hands on some good, well-paying jobs. That's it. That's everybody's formula. That's every politician's agenda, campaign promise, program. That's what every politician is running on, is the promise to create jobs. The fact of the matter is, it's not just income, and I think this is the point. It's not just income that is associated or should be associated with a job, but all of the other, I called them in the paper I wrote, I called them accoutrements, but the associated fringe benefits, if you will, to work. That all of these other things happen. Quality of life is improved, interpersonal relations improved, communication skills are improved. Through networking, we begin to meet new people at different levels of society. So many things come as a result of work. And all of those things tend to be pushed into the background once we quantify the meaning and the significance of a job by the amount of money it pays. And I think that's what we were dealing with yesterday. And if you recall yesterday, at the very end of the program, one of the things that I was saying in my summation, or trying to suggest, is that in reality, we struggle so much with education, with the Common Core, with reform, how to basically turn education into something that is positive rather than the negatives that we hear all the time. And the fact of the matter is, what we've lost sight of is that work itself, the workplace itself, can become the ideal classroom. Because so many of the things that we hope to teach in our classrooms happen as part of working. And if we can look at the workplace as an opportunity to learn about the world and the people in it, by identifying and looking much more carefully and much more analytically at the nature of the particular job we do, and I don't care what it is. If you interact with other people, even online, but if you interact with other people And you basically must be responsible in render an accounting to somebody for a particular task or set of tasks that you are expected to do. Then in the process of completing that task or those tasks, you are learning and you are growing and you are developing and you are becoming a much different person than you were. And if we could begin to look at work once again from that perspective, and this is the tough political one. The next comment I'm going to make is the tough part of that. If we could convince and get employers to work with us and to be willing to turn the workplace that they supervise or that they manage into a laboratory for the development of the people who work in it, we could begin to solve the issues of the lack of a skilled workforce, the lack of necessary workplace skills, the fact that jobs go unfilled because we don't have people with the qualifications to fill them. All of these things, it seems to me, would take care of themselves. But that requires a certain political and economic commitment and social commitment. Not only from the people who have the job, but also the candidates who are applying for it. What we're talking about is a total attitudinal change in the way people approach work, the way people approach life, and the extent to which we can use work as a way to educate people into how they approach life and how they deal with it and how they learn to successfully negotiate and navigate it. I want to share with you, and I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but since we began late today, let's just go on. If we need to take a break, later in our full hour, we can do that. A number of years ago, I'm going to say in the late 70s, I found myself embedded in an academic situation that I was totally unprepared for. Let me tell you exactly what happened. In 1975, I was fortunate to land a job teaching American history, world history also, teaching history at a community college in Richmond, Virginia. Up to that point, most of the college-level teaching I had done had been in 4-year baccalaureate institutions or at the graduate level. I had taught graduate classes as well. But in 1975, I found myself teaching at a community college. And I had mixed feelings about that, because most of the people that I knew in higher education looked down on community college as not being, they looked upon it as kind of pretend college. It wasn't real because the students there weren't really students. That was the general impression from many of the people that I knew in higher education. I was in Richmond, Virginia for 16 years, from 1975 until 1986. And I found this to be one of the most enlightening, eye-opening academic experiences I ever had in my life. Because I found myself teaching to adults, to evening students, to people that were supporting families and working full time and trying to get a college degree in addition to that. And while I had read about these folks, this was the first opportunity I ever had to experience it. I guess what I can say very simply, and I think you'll all understand exactly what I mean. For the first time in all the years that I was in higher education, I could honestly say, these are my people. And I absolutely jumped into the experience with both feet. I loved it. A couple of years into this experience, I was called into the provost's office, which is kind of like the dean, the provost of the community college, and he basically said, we've got an opportunity here that we think you'd be perfect for. And I said, what exactly is that? And he said, well, one of our administrators on another campus, and this particular community college had three different campuses around Richmond, one in downtown, one in the West End, and one in the East End. But one of the administrators, or one of the deans or associate deans, or whoever they were, had written a federal grant, and it got funded. And consequently, the college had taken on a set of grant responsibilities, and there was nobody in the college that really understood, that really knew what all was involved in this particular grant. It was a grant for a program called Cooperative Education. And I'm sure there are people out there who have heard the term cooperative education. You don't hear it that much anymore, but in the late 70s and 80s, it was big in education because it was considered to be a major reform in the area specifically of higher education. And so basically what I was offered was the opportunity to head up this grant program because there was nobody else. And in order to do that, they were going to send me to a workshop so that I could learn a little bit about cooperative education because I admitted I knew nothing about it. And I took it on. I kept saying, what can go wrong? It's an opportunity to learn something new, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was given a release from a responsibility for teaching a couple of classes. My teaching load was regularly 5 classes, 5 classes a semester, and they reduced my teaching load to 3 so that I could spend time heading up and writing up the appropriate paperwork and getting this grant program off the ground. So one of the things that was involved was I attended a workshop on cooperative education at the University of Detroit. And I spent a week in Detroit. And in the process of spending that time there, I learned cooperative education. I didn't know anything about it. And I came back to Richmond, Virginia as the biggest fan of cooperative education that there ever was. And I still am. In the research that I did, I learned that some of the most prestigious institutions of higher education in the country that had reputations in cooperative education were heavily involved in the programs. Many of these people made presentations at this week-long workshop that I attended. One of them was Northeastern University, which is in Boston. And of course, I knew Northeastern very well. I grew up with a lot of friends that went there, and I knew that Northeastern University had a cooperative education program. I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that they had one. Turns out that Northeastern University has one of the prestige cooperative education programs, along with some others. And basically, the whole idea of cooperative education is work experience. Students who are in a cooperative education program actually spend a portion of their college years, months, getting on-the-job experience. Academically, the academics call this experiential education. In other words, you learn by actually doing it. And of course, I'm all for that. All I could think of was Aristotle, and said the only way to learn something is to do it. And so I thought that the concept was wonderful. My problem was that I taught history. And I'm saying, how does cooperative education relate to the teaching of history or political science, government, or any of the social sciences that I was most directly involved in? One of the presenters at this workshop was from Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Antioch College is a very famous four-year liberal, well, now I think it has graduate programs, but at that time it was a liberal arts college, one of the most prestigious in the country. And for better than 50 years, Antioch had featured a cooperative education program for liberal arts majors. This intrigued me because I couldn't figure out, traditionally everybody said, why would you major in the liberal arts? You can't get a job in it. There's not a call for philosophers or, other than teaching sociology or geography or whatever, there's really no place for these people. So, and here's an institution that for 50 years has been conducting a major academic program for liberal arts majors in work. I couldn't figure out how the two connected at all. It was one of the most enlightening learning experiences that I ever had in my life. And I'll be very honest with you, I have been tapping into and drawing from that experience for the last 30 years. The paper that I was privileged to discuss here yesterday at the Virtual Center is in large part a product of that experience. And I felt at the end of yesterday's program that I would be remiss if I didn't take the next logical step in what we were talking about jobs and work and dignity and all the rest of it, and share with you a way to do it. It's one thing to talk about what we need to do. It's another thing to actually be able to give examples of how to do it, and do it in a way where it works. I had to go back to a community college in Richmond, Virginia, and I had to enroll students in college classes for which they paid tuition and would get academic credit for work. And one of the things that I had to do was go out into the Richmond community, talk to employers, and find employers who were willing to work with me in opening up learning opportunities for students in their workplaces. I went to places like Philip Morris. I went to hospitals. I went to clinics. I went to the police department. I went to the federal prison in downtown Richmond. I went to retail stores, hardware stores, department stores, and all the rest of it. And of course, the people I talked to in these businesses would say to me, I don't understand how a student taking general studies at the community college level, psychology 101, sociology 101, history 101, English 101, public speaking 101, and all those introductory general studies courses. I don't understand how my business connects to that. So I would sit down and I would spend an hour, sometimes more, talking to these folks. And this is what I would say. And the irony is, the more I talked to employers, the more committed I became to the program. I was selling myself on this program more than employers. But let me explain exactly what the issue is. What I was asking employers to do was allow me to turn the particular work experience into a learning experience for students. Let me give you an example. If we had a student that was majoring in business, or more specifically in accounting, then obviously finding a placement in the accounting office of a business would be very helpful, because the accounting major would get a hands-on experience in keeping the books for a real live company, and figuring out fringe benefits and taxes and all the other things that accountants learn. That's easy. That's what traditionally cooperative education was all about, is giving law students, potential attorneys, experience in law offices or in courts, giving criminal justice majors experience working with the police departments and in corrections areas, giving accountants the opportunity to work in business offices of employers. That's traditionally what cooperative education always about. The key here, is the liberal arts piece. That's the part that didn't make sense to me. But once it started to make sense to me, that's the part I had to try to sell employers on. And here's the way it worked. We have a student that is taking an introductory class, 101, in psychology. That student is also taking a class in sociology. He's also taking a class in American government. Also taking a class in speech, communication skills. What I would like this employer to do for our students, however many we could place, is give our students the opportunity to see in the real world of work how the principles and the values associated with psychology actually work. The psychology of managers and supervisors relating to staff people. The psychology of new employees interacting with the old folks, with the experienced folks, in order to develop situations which today we call mentoring. In sociology, the interactions of people in the workplace. How people from different neighborhoods and different socioeconomic backgrounds are able to come together and work together in order to get a job done. How do people of different races overcome any kind of racial prejudice they might have so that they can go to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and rub shoulders with people of another race that perhaps other than the job they would never have had an experience that they never would have had that experience. Or religion. How do we get people of different religions to work together? By working together, do a number of different religions come to appreciate and understand each other to the point that they can see the fallacy of stereotypes, like working with people of the Jewish faith and the traditional stereotype idea that Jewish people are primarily driven by the bottom line, and realizing that there's much more that's positive that we can all gain by interacting on a regular basis and working with people of a different faith, of the Jewish faith, or the Catholic faith, or evangelical people, or whatever. In government, what about the process of working the aisles in order to try to build a coalition to get a particular idea converted into a piece of legislation that might pass the Virginia General Assembly? Could we place students in the assembly to study the process of how you build coalitions and how you negotiate and how the give and take goes on that really becomes the essence of what politics is all about? In public speaking, how about situations where, as an employee, you are given a problem and you are asked, because you are a student, you are asked to go out and do research and come back with a hypothesis as to how this particular company can best overcome or complete this particular challenge or this particular problem. We want you to not only conduct the research and to write it up, but to present it to your employer, to your supervisor, to a board. If there is a group of stockholders or investors or whatever, that you can make your presentation. Now, there's one thing to do research, write up a paper and get a grade on it. That's what happens in a traditional class. It's something else to do research, write up a presentation, and then stand up in front of 25 or 30 people, present your ideas, answer questions, and defend the particular position that you've taken, that your research has led you to adopt. Basically, what I was talking about then is that if you take an introductory psychology 101 textbook or a sociology 101 textbook or a political science government textbook 101, it would seem to me that the content of every chapter in every one of those textbooks happens in the workplaces of this country every day. What we have to do, and this is what I would encourage employers to do, and this is asking an awful lot of them, believe me. Some of them were afraid to do it. Some of them didn't feel like they had the flexibility to be able to do it, even though they wanted to. They felt like they had to get approval on high. Because basically what I was asking, in areas like labor relations, grievances, to have a student actually study the actual operation of the grievance process in the workplace. How does a worker who believes that he or she has been mistreated or been maltreated, how do they go about pursuing justice within this company, within this corporation? Is there a procedure? Is there a grievance procedure? Do employees have the opportunity to counsel? Is there somebody in that company that can act as a counsel in a grievance situation with an employee who might be nervous or afraid to go and take up the issue by themselves? Basically, what we were asking employers to do is open up their workplace by making it a learning experience. And our point was, first of all, these students were employees. They were hired to do a job. If the employer was going to pay them a wage, many of them were obviously minimum wage jobs, but that's not the point. The issue here was not income. The issue here was learning and education and experience. We even had a program where it was possible for the same student to experience a cooperative education opportunity in consecutive years. 1 year doing this and another year doing that. When we graduated students from this community college, most of them obviously went on to 4-year colleges. They transferred to colleges and universities to get their bachelor's degree. But even the ones that didn't, the quality of experience, the degree of maturization, I'm tongue-tied here, the degree of maturity, I'll get around that one, the degree of maturity and experience, the ability to argue a point of view, the ability to conduct research, the ability to use evidence to support a point of view, the ability to interact with people, different kinds of people, bottom line employees, as well as mid-level managers and supervisors, as well as board members and corporate executives. Think of the experience of a business major working in a bank and being able to actually sit in and participate in the designing of a loan, a home loan, or a small business loan. Learning about the issues related to incorporation. In fact, it's obvious that I've been talking about this now for about 20 minutes or so, and I get very enthused about it because I believed in it then, and I believe in it even more now. And the irony of the situation is, as our employment, as our situation in this nation becomes more dire all the time, as jobs continue to disappear, as the jobs that replace them are not nearly the jobs that we lost, and as we are dealing with more and more people who are desperate, people who have given up looking, people who have abandoned any faith they might have had in such a thing as the American dream, it seems to me that this is the kind of an experience that can be reduced not only at the college level, but you could do this in high school. You could have these same kinds of programs. In fact, I did. We had a grant program here in West Virginia some years ago in our high schools, called Schools That Work, Schools to Work, and it was the same kind of thing. To a point. The missing element is that increasingly cooperative education became an income generator. In other words, I mentioned that whilst cooperative education is still big in certain places, it's still a major part of the curriculum at Northeastern, for example. And of course, one of the reasons that it is there is because Northeastern is a private university and tuition is extremely high. And the one feature of the cooperative education program at Northeastern is that a 4-year degree took 5 or 5.5 years. And the thinking was that in the midst of it, students would go and experience work. And that would give them an opportunity to earn money to help pay the tuition. And consequently, cooperative education became a mechanism for funding students so that they could stay in school and graduate. And all of this was true. All of this was positive. But the fact of the matter is, the liberal arts aspect of it, the learning aspect of it, is one that I don't believe we have ever seriously tried. I tried it on a very small scale. And I probably had 20, 22 students doing it in and around the Richmond area. And then the grant ended, and, that was the end of that. But the idea lives on. And I really believe that many of the things we talked about here yesterday at the Virtual Center related to jobs and work and the whole idea of dignity, all of that is involved with people understanding the world around them. That's the purpose of education. We keep talking about why our schools aren't producing, why our kids are coming out of school and they can't do anything. They don't know anything. And basically, I had one line in what we covered yesterday that I think said it all. The difference between the classroom and the workplace is that in the classroom you study about life. In the world of work you live it. What we need to do is find a way to marry those two. We need to get employers. We talk all the time, and this a little bit of history associated with this. We talk all the time about the American dream. Yesterday, one of the names that I mentioned was Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington believed that the new South, so-called, the developing South after the Civil War, the reconstructed South, provided an opportunity for ex-slaves, freedmen, that was unheralded. But in order for it to work, the white South had to be willing to abandon racial separation. Booker T. Washington saw, after the end of the Civil War, that the white South was moving towards segregation. The one thing about slavery, prior to the Civil War, when the South was predominantly slave labor, slavery and segregation are opposites. By definition, plantation slavery, required the constant interaction amongst the races. Now, granted, it wasn't equal. It wasn't a relationship among equals. We know that. But it was absolutely the opposite of a segregated society where whites didn't come into contact with blacks and blacks didn't come into contact with whites. Booker T. Washington saw that the post-Civil War South was moving rapidly towards segregation. He realized that 4 million ex-slaves were likely to be overlooked as the South began to develop industrially. All of these jobs, Southern employers were going overseas to find a workforce. And Booker T. Washington's point, we are a workforce. There are 4 million of us. We're right here. Just give us the chance. And the post-Civil War South refused to buy in. They would not do it. To them, racial segregation was more important to preserve than economic development was important to promote. Consequently, the Southern standard of living and way of life for many years into the 20th century suffered because Southern states were maintaining a dual system based on race. I mentioned my own experience with cooperative education, how difficult it is to ask employers to do this. It would seem to me that in order for employers to do this, they would have to be given some incentive, some reason other than humanitarianism and goodwill and community goodwill and community spirit and all the rest of it. That's fine, but it only goes so far. Seems to me we would need some sort of government incentive, a tax break, something. Some kind of benefits that would encourage employers to work more cooperatively and more closely with colleges and universities to set up these kinds of programs and to develop the job. The term that the cooperative education program used all the time was job development. The job was already there. The employer, whatever the company was, the employer knew what the job was that had to be done. That's what they were hiring somebody to do. But the educational side, the learning side of that work experience, that's something that you needed to bring in somebody that knew education. And so basically what myself or somebody else would have to do was go in and work with the employer to develop the job. In other words, to identify the tasks associated with doing the job, and then to identify and define the educational experience that each of those tasks would permit to happen. In other words, you're turning a work experience into an educational experience. It doesn't mean that it doesn't remain a work experience. It becomes both. But if it's done right, the whole attitude, not only of the working people, the employees, but the attitude of the company themselves is affected positively by this. The atmosphere changes. The enthusiasm changes. Going to work each day ceases to be a drag because every day is a new experience. And as a student, you are being encouraged to polish your skills of observation. You are being asked to go into the workplace and not just look at what's going on there, but see what's going on there. Sometimes employers are uncomfortable with this naturally. So there would have to be, you'd have to make some accommodations, obviously, depending on what the particular job was. No company's going to open its books, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's certain things that you can't legitimately expect. But the fact of the matter is, the concept is an important one. But before that can even happen, it seems to me, as a society, we need to revisit, to rediscover the significance of work as a learning and growing development opportunity for people. Once our jobs become learning experiences, and I'm not talking just about certain kinds of jobs, I'm thinking, fast food. I mean, the people who work behind the counter in a fast food situation interact with the public all the time. They make change. They deal with specific requests. They deal with unique requests. They have to get along with the people they work with who actually do the cooking in the back. And so interpersonal relations, interpersonal skills, communication skills, all of those things, it seems to me, apply. So we can literally turn the work experience into a program which would seek to make the American dream a reality again, if indeed it ever was. It would require the same thing that Booker T. Washington was looking for from Southern society. It would require the honest cooperation of employers. It would imply or assume a willingness to open up the system and make opportunity available to qualified people. Once you started to get people qualified and skilled, and these people became valuable employees, there needed to be an opportunity for them to move up and to be paid accordingly. But the old idea, I'm going back to the Newt Gingrich example we used yesterday of his 2011 Des Moines speech, when he talked about putting kids to work cleaning their schools in order that they could make money. His assumption was that all they had to do was work, and suddenly all these other things just happened automatically, all these good things. We need to make those things happen. We need to identify them, we need to define them, and we need to devise strategies to make sure they happen. We need to redefine work. One more piece to this very complicated puzzle, I admit, is organized labor, unions. We're talking about a level of respect in the American workplace that has long since disappeared. We are talking about a work environment in this country which is not reduced to the us versus them kind of situation. We are talking about real dignity, genuine respect, genuine opportunity, promotions and decisions being made based on what's fair and what's right. We are depending upon the corporate sector in America to walk the walk. In conjunction with talking the talk. For a long time, employers and managers and supervisors and the people I'm talking about have always said, the jobs are there, we just need the people with the skills to fill them. This is an opportunity for employers to design and develop their own workforces. This is an opportunity for employers to help develop and generate the ingredients of the skilled workforce that for a long time they've been claiming is not there, and for a long time they've been blaming our schools for not producing it. For me, and until I retired 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I spent the better part of half a century in higher education. But for me, this experience and this opportunity to connect what I was teaching in a history class with the real world that people I was teaching lived in, that was a connection I had difficulty making. I did a lot of research. One of the things I realized, because as I think you can tell, if you're a regular participant here at the Virtual Center, you know how often I keep going back to education. History of education, the goals we've had, the mistakes we've made, those kinds of things, has always been a thing for me. I have become very, very interested in the history of education because I believe that there's a lot to learn from the history. And when I was in graduate school, I had the unique opportunity, and I've mentioned this before, of working as a graduate teaching assistant with Jürgen Herbst in the Department of Educational Policy Studies at the University of Wisconsin. I was given an opportunity to teach with a man who really knew how to teach. And the point, I guess the point I'm making is that this kind of experience offers a lot. When I left the community college as a full-time employee in 1986, and I think I've mentioned before, I didn't leave willingly. I was caught up in one of these major cutbacks because of a tremendous decline in enrollment, and 37 positions at the college, community college that I taught at were eliminated in one hit, and I was one of them. I happened to be the only one of the 37 that had a PhD, and but that's another issue. But anyway, I had to find a way to try to earn a living. With a PhD in history? Other than teach, what am I going to do? But I had this cooperative education experience while I was there, during my 11-year tenure there. And I began to realize that there seemed to be in our society a major disconnect between the campus and the workplace, between employers and those who manned our classrooms. They were not talking to each other. Employers were saying that our instructors, our colleges and universities and high schools were turning out people who couldn't do anything. The people in our schools were saying, we're doing the best we can to turn out students and they can't find jobs. All they can find are minimum wage jobs. People expect them to work for nothing. There's no respect. How are we going to encourage kids, just getting out of school, to have faith in the future when they can't get a job? Or when they're taken advantage of or exploited by an employer. Basically, what I was finding is there's a total disconnect between the classroom and the workplace. I was unemployed. So I thought to myself, why not? I'll start my own company. I will build a company whose mission is to bring the classroom and the workplace together, because I've learned how to do it. So I began to design training programs, workplace training programs. But the programs were kind of unique because I was dealing with things like ethics and morality and trust and responsibility and accountability and respect and all of those things. And I actually found myself in a period of about 2.5 years, I was beginning to really make some headway in the Richmond, Virginia community. I was beginning to get some work. I can remember contacting a manager at Philip Morris in South Richmond. It was one of Richmond's major employers. And I said to him, I wanted to know if you'd be interested in a class in workplace ethics. And he said, well, we don't have an ethics problem here. This is Philip Morris. We don't have an ethics problem here. We don't have any. There's nothing wrong with selling cigarettes and saying they're safe, and when they're not, and all this. And I didn't get into that at all. But seriously, what I basically was involved in. Finally, it dawned on me that nobody's going to hire me to do a workshop, because that would almost force them to acknowledge that they had an ethics problem. So finally, I said, and this was out of desperation as much as anything else, I contacted Philip Morris and I said, look, I've got an ethics training program that I think is top dollar. But there's no way you can know that until you experience it. If you are willing to give me a group of employees for 2 hours or 2.5 hours on a morning for this workshop, I'll come in and I'll do the workshop free. And if that's the end of it, I'll leave and you'll never hear from me again. And folks at Philip Morris bought into that. Bill said, okay, we got nothing to lose. Our employees are required to take training, certain amount of training, as part of their job. So yeah, we'll schedule a workshop on like a Saturday morning from 9 to 11:30. Not going to cost us anything other than snacks and coffee and that kind of thing. So I went in and I did the workshop. And when it was over, the folks in Philip Morris came to me and said, what other workshops can you do? And I said, I've been teaching college and university level for 25 years. You tell me what your issue is, and I can develop the workshop in anything you want. And so what I found is that I was beginning to get jobs with some major employers in Richmond, and then the opportunity to come back to West Virginia and to go to Concord University raised its, ended up on the table in 91. And I actually talked to my wife seriously at the time, and I said, should I take this? I've been offered this job at Concord in West Virginia, and it has health benefits. It has, and I was just literally, I'd wake up every morning unemployed, and it would be up to me to find a way to generate income each day. So finally, because of health care and because of the fondness that we had, both of us had for West Virginia, we came back. But when I came to West Virginia in the early 90s, I incorporated this company, and it remains an incorporated company in the state of West Virginia called Training Arts Incorporated. Each year since 1995, I have paid the fees and maintained the license of incorporation. While I was teaching and administering at the university level, I didn't use it. But there it sits, and it's based on this principle of linking the workplace and the classroom. Not just claiming, but showing employers and their employees how higher education, which is traditionally viewed as not being practical and not being realistic, how in fact it is just the opposite. How in fact you can take excerpts from Shakespeare, from Shakespeare's plays, and you can do a 2 or 3 hour workshop on William Shakespeare as manager. And you read Shakespeare and you look at the principles of management and the principles of psychology and understanding the human psyche that we see in Shakespeare. And you can create a workshop on developing management skills for mid-level managers with content that is based on Shakespeare that is based on the founders, that is based on Aristotle, that is based on Plato. Example. I'm giving away the store here, but this is basically where I'm coming from. Plato's allegory of the cave. Very quickly, and we only have 15 minutes left, so I'm not going to get into anything too dramatic here. But Plato's allegory of the cave. You have all of these people chained within a cave, and they can't turn around. And the sunlight that comes in the opening of the cave behind them casts shadows on the wall. And these people are chained in place. And consequently, what you have are a group of people, what you have is a group of people who have never seen reality. Everything they have seen is merely the shadow of what's real. For them, the real world is the world of shadows and imagination. And then one member of that group is released from the cave and allowed to turn around, see the sun, go outside the cave, and after his eyes adjust from the darkness to the light, this one person is able to see the real world. And then Plato raises the challenge. This person goes back into the cave. How do you convince these people who know nothing else that what they see is not real? More importantly, how do you convince them that what's real is so much more exciting and so much more beautiful and so much more stimulating? If they would only look. Plato says, rather than have their entire foundation of their lives shaken, they would literally kill you rather than take seriously the message you bring. They are so committed, so embedded in their little world that anybody that threatens it is an enemy. Think about that. How many situations can we think of today where people are so fixated on their assumptions, on the things they believe, that when you start to introduce things that they never knew about before, they say, oh, that can't be true. No. And they hang on to what they knew, what they always knew and what they always believed, and they'll fight to defend it. What a management problem for a mid-level manager. You are a mid-level manager who has discovered that a major activity in your place of employment can be done in a totally different way. It can save the company all sorts of money. It can generate more business. It can provide more self-fulfillment for the employees. But the first thing you're going to get is, we can't do that. We've always done it this way. I'm suggesting that a mid-level manager in an educational setting, in a training workshop, can read Plato and can benefit from it. Ditto for Shakespeare. Ditto for Faulkner. And on and on and on. What I'm suggesting is, in the real world, there are real world examples of the principles and the concepts that we have built our entire educational establishment around. If we can find a way to bring those two together so that students can really experience the concept in action, the concept as reality, how much more meaningful their time in the classroom will be, how much more productive their time in the workplace will be, how much more dignity and self-fulfillment and a sense of respect will happen among our employees. Literally, the idea of getting a job and the drudgery that is often associated with going to work at unbelievable hours and doing mundane, routine, rather unimportant, unchallenging things over and over and over again will disappear. In the process, we will be educating people to be able to take on the challenges of a changing technological world. Because mathematics is no longer a set of problems on a blackboard that only one out of every 10 students can understand. But in the real world, mathematics is a real principle that operates in real lives, in real places. I think you can take these ideas and you can expand them in a number of different ways. That, I would suggest to you, is the follow-up to our program yesterday on work, as far as I have can find it. And I mentioned at the beginning of our program today Harry's email and Harry's attachment on a book by Richard Sennett called The Hidden Injuries of Class. I'm not promoting the book, but I've read significant paragraphs from it, 16 pages of quotations of paragraphs lifted from this book thanks to Harry. Let me touch on some of the issues that Richard Sennett addresses and some of the reasons why I thank Harry for exposing me to an author who seems, at least in the little bit I've seen, to have a lot to say and a lot to contribute. In this book called The Hidden Injuries of Class, Sennett takes on issues like the difference between respect and prestige. Think about that. What do you think about when you confront the word prestige? What do you think about when you encounter the word respect? To what extent are the two related? To what extent are they somewhat different? Sennett, in 1972, in his book called The Hidden Injuries of Class, talks about something that he defined then as, quote, flexible capitalism, unquote. What he was talking about, and this was the early 70s, was a system of capitalism that was changing rapidly. And by defining it or calling it flexible capitalism, what was changing was the employee's stability in the job. That what was changing in the world of capitalism was stability of employment. And increasingly, the emphasis was more being placed on developing individual skills so that the employee can move from one job to another, from one career field to another. In other words, the employee had to be flexible because the world of work was changing so dramatically and so fast. What Sennett points out is that while this flexibility benefited employers because it made organization and unions very difficult in a volatile, unstable working environment, for the employee, it literally took away all sense of stability and predictability It eliminated the idea of a future. Government went along with this by changing the tax policies and changing retirements. Pensions disappeared. And employees were encouraged to invest in 401ks. In other words, to become players in the stock market. So in a sense, all sense of stability and predictability that was associated with the world of work began to disappear. So what Richard Sennett is talking about is, it's flexible capitalism, yes, but that flexibility works to the benefit of some. It works to the detriment of many. Great stuff. And of course, associated with the idea of flexible capitalism is the threat to employers of organizations. If you can isolate individual employees and so that they basically lose the ability to unite and to join together, then that makes your ability to manage, at least from the perspective of the employer, somewhat easier. In fact, if you have a good union and good committed worker organizations, they can contribute tremendously to the success of the organization. Richard Sennett talks in this book, in fact, this is his major conclusion in the book. The concluding paragraphs in the book focus on what he calls the psychology of autonomy. And he defines autonomy. He said, autonomy is respecting in other people things in them that you don't understand. His point is, it's not necessary to understand what everybody else is about and what everybody else is doing. If you can respect them, even if you don't understand all of what they're doing, then that brings with it a sense of dignity, especially to the people that you seek to relate to the weak. And that's what Sennett is talking about, is respecting the differences between people. And if we can genuinely do that, then that builds a sense of dignity in other people. And it creates a situation where other people want to be around us because we make them feel good. And then one of the other issues that Sennett deals with in this idea about hidden injuries of class are the differences between individuals who operate independently all by themselves, all alone, as opposed to individuals who have the benefit of support groups, unions, working groups, teams. And the whole idea of teams and the support that people are able to provide each other. And what Sennett is talking about is the difference between managing people as isolated individual people separated from everybody else and managing groups of people as groups, people who can turn to each other for support and for assistance and for help and for aid and all the rest of it. Excellent stuff. Thank you, Harry. And I commit to the fact that I will spend some time in the next few days looking at the rest of what you sent me from Richard Sennett. It's 59 minutes after the hour. We've just about completed our day together here at the Virtual Center. I hope that this was interesting and informative for you. It seemed to be a logical extension of what we had done yesterday. Tomorrow, I think we'll be taking on the issues of religion. But again, the phone number, 304-663-4676, will be there. If you'd like to continue or pursue this topic further, by all means, pick up the phone tomorrow, call in, and we'll do just that. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center, thanking you for joining in today on this Tuesday, the 5th of May. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe, and thank you.